am a money guy. If you've listened to the show before, you know it is my passion. It is my self-expression. It's my day job. I am a money guy, but I am married to an artist, a theater director. My husband, we've been together for 26 years. He's been an artist since he was 12. So I know a lot of artists. I know a lot of people with the artistic temperament, and I have enormous respect and admiration for people who pursue that as their path and their passion. And it's a hard go when it comes to money and being an artist. So I was really pleased to see this particular book cross my path. It is called How Artists Make Money and How Money Makes Artists. Its author, David Barry, joins us now from Edmonton, Alberta. Hello there.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
What made you decide to write a book about the relationship between art and money? What was the catalyst for you?
Well, I mean, the simplest part was that I put out a book in 2020, middle of the pandemic, and sort of realized rather quickly that it was hard to make a living at this, particularly since, I looked into it and it's like I was doing okay, especially as far as Canadian books go. I'm fine, but it's still just really, really difficult. And especially around that time too, a lot of conversations had started to happen around, touring musicians and how their livelihood had gone up in smoke, and any kind of performing artist and what were they going to do. So it was just this nice confluence of very personal struggles and seeing some of what was going on in the wider world with artists.
I want to read a quote from the book to provide context for our conversation. Writing this book may have convinced me of the crushing power money has over art and artists, but it has also underlined my love for their perseverance. As someone who's married to an artist, like this really resonated with me. It's really the harder path every single time, and yet they choose it. What do you think? I mean, you're a writer, so you have this in you and you know lots of artists. What is the through line that has them pursue the love of the art, even knowing that it would be easier to be a teller at a bank?
So I think there's probably two big things for me. One is maybe the more noble aspect, and one is like the slightly crasser, you get paid in other ways aspect. The noble aspect is just that like it really is beautiful to be able to share some part of yourself and to like, be this kind of self-possessed. There is something special about being an artist. You are afforded an honesty and a authenticity that really comes with very few other ways of living in the world. And then I think the slightly crasser one is just that, like, well, you get a nice little bit of cultural capital, right? You maybe don't get paid, right? But you do get to call yourself an artist. You do get
Sure.
sort of that sense of self that I do
Sure.
think a little bit of that ego drives people too.
One of the really interesting sections, and we'll get to the how to in a second, but you write about the history of art and money, and in particular about patrons supporting artists throughout
Yeah.
history. What is one or two of the insights that you gleaned from history that you feel are relevant and resonant today?
I really think the biggest one for me was just how tightly tied to money the idea of even an artist is. Like,
Mm.
really looking into this, it was our conception of who is an artist, right? Obviously, people have made things for a long time, have created what we would consider art since for as long as we have records of people, right? But this idea of sort of a privileged position, who does this, and that this is a enlightened individual who produces these things, is really tightly tied to people with money, and specifically people with money kind of needing to reflect some of that glory on themselves,
Mm.
especially when we're talking older patrons. These are people who essentially have inherited wealth, or some inherited position in society, who need to justify, well, why am I in charge? And it's because I have, you know I mean, it's a variety of reasons, but their self-justification is because they are enlightened, because they can appreciate these things. And one way they show that is by elevating artists to this
Mm.
special position and using it essentially as a way of justifying their own power.
One of the notions that I introduced to coaching and have for years with artists is the idea of a patron, not as an external force, but as a
Mm.
cloned version of yourself. So
Yes.
you have your 3 days of your art that is sacred to you, that no one can touch, and 3 days in which you are, doing whatever it is to make the widget, to operate as the patron for the
Mhm.
artist who just happens to be in the same body and sleep in the same bed as you. How hard is it to live the paradox of that? Because most artists I know would really rather be the artist not even 6 days a week, 7 days a week, 9 days a week.
Yeah, exactly. It's really difficult. Although, I mean, I think that's fabulous advice because as I see, like in the historical research, something like less than 10 or 15% of people who ever got to call themselves artists got to spend full time being artists for any length of their career, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like that is honestly probably the only viable path for most people. But it's absurdly difficult. It's especially as the world has gone on, right? Like there used to be more jobs that maybe it was possible to have that separation, or you could work, say, on a part-time job and still maybe get by. As those opportunities dry up, it's just harder and harder. And I mean, like, I know for myself, right? It's incredibly hard to find a job that provides anything like a meaningful wage, a livable wage that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't take up, 40 plus hours of your week
Yeah.
in and of itself.
There's
It's,
also, I think, a reality for artists that even the most successful of them are doing non-art activities a good portion of the
mhm,
time. If we think about Margaret Atwood, maybe she'd love to write 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but she's writing and then she's on book tours, doing media interviews, talking to her accountant, showing
mhm.
up at events, like doing all the things. What are some of the big, I'm going to ask it in this way, even though it sounds super contrived. What are the tips? So you've got people who have this self expression, they have this talent, this gift
Mhm.
they want to give to the world, and they got to have a roof over their head and groceries in the fridge. What are some things that you have learned that you've included in the book that you feel are like, listen, this could be helpful. If you've chosen this path, here's some things you can think about.
I mean, I think the first thing to get off right the bat is that you have to have that mindset that like, look, you're probably not going to make a full-time living at this, and that is fine. In fact, that is like how people do it. And I do think one thing that comes up so often with artists is that they feel like because they haven't, it's not all they can devote their time to, that is in some way a failure. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just like, that's not true. That is not how anyone makes this work, especially in the early going, right? You're a lottery winner if you can spend full time at this, and you need to kind of have that mindset. I think secondly, that be your own patron kind of thing is wonderful advice, right? Like, yeah, pick those things, find those things that give you the time and space to be creative somewhere else. That they're hard to come by, but like that's one of those ways you should evaluate that kind of job. And then thirdly is just, there's no replacement for a wonderful safety net, support group, whatever that is. That's
Mm-hmm.
friends, that's family. I'm sure you know very well what it is to be supporting an artist at this, right? Um, but all those things will help you not only with your art and getting it out there in the world, but can help you in very, very practical ways about like where is that support coming from so you can spend more time on your art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where are
Yeah.
these other opportunities coming from? Yeah.
Love is love is love, but boy, it's much easier when an artist marries someone who isn't one. Because having two people with that kind of income volatility
Mhm.
is more complicated than if one person has dental. Um,
Absolutely.
One of the ideas, another idea that I talk a lot about in this context is that your life is an act of creation and
Mhm.
your canvas for a painter is an act of creation, but there's a lot of crappy stuff that you have to do. You have to paint the brushes, you have to go to the store, you have to deal with the fumes. Like there's a lot of things that you don't love about actually putting the paint on the canvas there. And yet, there are a lot of artists who would say, either outwardly or inwardly, that they're not good at money. They're not good
Mhm.
at using that as a tool. And yet, as craftspeople, they're extraordinary with lots of tools, the tools of the typewriter, the tools of the sculpting knife. What do you think the hurdle is? Is it something about the concept of artists that has them have a harder time learning to use what I would argue is just another tool in the toolbox?
There might actually be some left brain, right brain stuff. I don't know. But I think a huge part of it, at least in our society, is that we actively discourage artists from thinking about these things, right? Like we have this mindset that it somehow poisons your art to think
Mm,
about it in any kind of business term, that they're antithetical, right? You're something like a sellout if you're in any way focused on the business aspect of this. And on like for a lot of people, I think by the time they realize that is a detriment to them, it's sort of too late. They've already gone down this path or ignored that or let that atrophy. So like I think again, it's just as much as anything, it is coming to this with the mindset that like, look, part of honoring your gift of being the artist you can be is figuring out a way to do it in a sustainable way because passion and drive and love of something is not going to take you too far when you go to bed hungry. You
Mm.
know, like that's just how it is.
I want to read one more quote from the book and get your take on it. We don't have a lot of time left, but I'm not willing to let this go. It is this. This is from you. I might run on a higher octane shame than average, but there's been almost no point of the process of writing this book that hasn't sent me into on a spiral into some level of shame. What does that mean? And why did you include that really vulnerable and authentic and honest and compelling statement in this book?
Well, I think we do have to be, this is part of being honest about money. And, you know, one of the things we celebrate about art, I think, is its honesty, is its willingness to go into these aspects of ourselves, excuse me, that some of which are wonderful, some of which are kind of dirty and ugly. And I just think you need, I felt it was important for me to address this, to admit to people that like part of why maybe this is hard is that it does feel shameful. It feels shameful to maybe not make as much as you think you should, or to, you know, not be what it is you want it to be or set out to be. Or even sometimes maybe it's a bit shameful to admit that like, hey, I could only do this because I got a bit of money from my parents or I did something. But it, you know, the only real problem stems from when we're not willing to face up to these things and admit these things, I think. It's that level of ignorance or shame or hiding things that leads to, I think, a lot of these problems down the road. So to me, it was just important to try to be able to address that and hopefully commiserate a little bit with
Mm,
other artists
yeah.
about these, you know, these feelings.
I talk to authors who who write their personal finance books from so many different demographics, and there's something irreplaceable about speaking into the listening of the people you're trying to reach,
Mm.
whether it's a religious group or an age group or a cultural group. And I think you've done this so effectively with your book. So congratulations, Dave.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.
David Barry, author of How Artists Make Money and How Money Makes Artists. He was in Edmonton today.